Now, with that being said, we can finally start the show. Shortbox Nation, without further ado, let's talk about the future of digital comics and how GlobalComix fits into that larger picture with its CEO and founder. Let's welcome Chris Carter to the show. Hey, Chris, how you doing, man? Welcome to the Shortbox.
Hey, man. Thank you so much for having me. Great. Thank you.
Yo, my pleasure, man. We've been meaning to make this happen for a couple weeks now. I have been excited to talk digital comics. Um, and I guess first and foremost, I want to know what what do you do as a CEO and I guess founder of a global digital comic platform? Like, what's your responsibilities? Like, what's a day in the life of the CEO of GlobalComix? What's that like?
I think this is one of the more fun questions that I've gotten in a while because depending on what period of time in the last
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 years you'd asked me that question, I would give you a different answer, right? But all right. So let's say up until we raised our first institutional fundraising, and we brought on Point 72 and Will Morris Endeavor. And that gave us the capital to be able to hire an engineering team. Prior to that, I built the entire platform myself. Like I
Oh
taught
wow.
myself code. I wrote all of the web platform. I wrote all of everything, right? And that's the kind of thing that you do as a founder, right? Like you put on whatever hats that you need
Yeah, you
because
get
you
your hands dirty.
realize it. Uh, Not so much anymore. Like now we're 18, 19 people. Um, So what do I do? Well, really, it's kind of around alignment and strategy and around communication. Um, my role these days is really around, like it kind of boils down to how do I make sure that the people on my team are empowered to move forward at the speed that they need to? How do I go in and remove blockers? And how do I participate in business development in a way that enables my team to be successful, right? Like at the short of it. But what does that actually mean? Well, it means that my day is kind of just filled with me.
Sounds a lot like my day job. A lot of emails.
Like back to back to back to back to back to back
Yeah.
to back to back.
Have you had any? Oh, well, real quick. Have you had any like I guess like fun meetings? What's been like the funnest meeting? Even though fun in meetings is almost like an oxymoron, but like, have you had a chance to talk to like some cool people, whether they creators or people that work for publishers? Like
Sure, like that happens, on a frequent basis, actually, right? Like, and it's not that meetings are bad per se. I guess I can answer this in kind of two pieces, and I'll just tackle the hard part first.
Mhm.
Right. And the hard part is just if you go 9 hours a day and you have 30-minute segments of calls, you're done talking by the end.
Oh yeah.
You're like, all right, I'm just gonna lay down and read some comics on bed. Right. Like that's the end. But not every day is like that. And the fun meetings are the ones where we get to speak with people that are super passionate about something. Whether they be partners or potentially investors or folks internally on the team or creators that are part of our ecosystem or something like the thing that really makes it fun is when I can see people's passion and motivation and engagement, and I can see that we're actually living into something that they're looking for, that we can be a really positive force in their life or in their business or in their career or in their what have you, right? Like, and those are the ones where I walk out of those calls and I'm like, oh, this feels good. We're doing something that makes a difference in people's life, you know.
Wow, that's right. That's rad to hear. Chris, before we continue on this trend talking about global comics and the business, I want to get to know you a little more because you mentioned before we hit record that you're from originally from Norway. You're currently living in Chi-Town. So maybe I might see you at C2E2 next year or something. But I'm curious, like, what is your earliest memory of comic books? Like, what was it like growing up in Norway and finding like, how did you find comics? Like, do you have an early memory or what was the first book that got you to be a fan of this art form?
Well, that's super easy. In Norway,
Mhm.
uh, even to this day, you have weekly comic magazines that show up in the supermarket and on the spinner rack. Not even the spinner rack, there's a wall. And I think I was like 5 or 6 or something like that. And it was the weekly Donald Duck, Don Rosa's Donald Duck. And it was just, like stories from the Disney world, from the Donald world. And it was, like if I had to pick a character that stood out to me back then, it would be Gizmo Duck. Like this guy that was driving around on one wheel and he was kind of like a robot, but
Yeah,
also
yeah.
with a robot suit kind of thing. It very much characterizes the type of personality that I am. I'm very technically oriented. I'm very technically savvy. I'm very like interested in technology just in the first place. And it's like, oh wait, this character is really cool. But that being said, like I've also had a penchant for history, and so comics like Asterix, for example, that
Wow,
took
yeah.
place like thousands of years in the past, and Roman Empire, and this and the other, also have a really big impact on me as a child. And it really wasn't until I was in my late teens, I'd say around like 15 or 16 or so, that I started reading more American comics exported. And I started with Spawn, like that's a pretty violent comic and it's pretty fucking cool for
Yeah,
its
I mean, if you're
age.
jumping from Gizmo Duck to Spawn, that is one hell of a jump for sure, in a
Yeah.
lot of different ways.
So, like those are the memories that stand out to me, really.
And I was reading your bio on the website, and it said that you come from kind of a manga background, and it seems that manga kind of served as your gateway into digital comics. Can you tell me like how those two worlds collided or connected for you, and what kind of manga do you like?
There was one of my friends back in Norway, back in I think 2002 or so. They're like, "Oh, I discovered this anime show called Naruto." I'm like, okay, cool. What's that about? Well, it's about this boy that has this like crazy demon spirit inside of them, and it's like ninjas and skills and jutsus. I'm like, this sounds cool. I'm gonna watch that. So I spent I went online and I downloaded this stuff because it was way before streaming
Hmm.
was available on the internet, and I think I binged all of it, and I was like, holy crap, this is so good. How do I get more? And then I realized that this was actually something that was adapted from the manga side, like the
Hmm.
animation part was. And then so okay, so I went and I read online the manga part of it. But then I realized that international distribution of manga was at the very best 24 months behind where it was originally. Keep in mind this is the mid to early aughts. And we're like, this doesn't seem right. We have the internet here. We should be able to do something with that. And so I participated in creating this community of translators, of folks that were really interested in and comic and manga fandom. And I helped give them the tools that they needed to like do translation and localization and have peers review those translations. Um, then, like eventually what happened with that was kind of we let them host the picture version of that translation, and that grew like exponentially. And this was like the really really early scanlation scene.
Yeah.
um and the thing that was really really core and important to us that we're doing this, or we're building this website and this community, was that we wanted so hard for these publishers to be present online and to be available to everyone else in the rest of the world. And we were able to set up a meeting in Tokyo in
Wow.
2009. We reached out to like Shueisha and
Hmm.
these folks through the European Viz intermediary. And for a lot of different reasons, the timing wasn't right. And so, they're like, okay, well, we can't really work with you guys in the context and construct that you exist in. So we're like, okay, well, in that world, like if you want to stop what we're doing, that's fine. Just, like ask us. And it took, I think, 9 or 10 months or something. And there was a post in one of the Shonen Jumps in 2010. People are asking, like these international scanlation sites, like, would you please? And so I saw that and I'm like, yes. And within 72 hours, like the whole website was just like all content was down. And that's because this was something that we did out of respect, out of passion, and out of desire to support the stories that were coming out of Japan and that were coming
Yeah.
out of manga.
So you're saying
Rather,
there wasn't. So you're saying
yeah.
the goal wasn't to like monetize or make money off of this. It was purely like, hey, there's something missing here where there is a want. We want to be able to read these and support these titles and these creators like on the up and up, but at the publisher level, they're not willing to, I guess maybe adopt the technology or, provide it digitally, which I think is still an issue now. There's still a lot. I think, is it Viz? I think it's Viz or the other one, Kodansha, that for the most part still does not have any, like their digital offering is very lackluster, and it's kind of aggravating for me. There's so many manga titles that I want to read, but I have to resort to less than official means. And so hearing you say that you built this community of people willing to do translation and do scans, I'll be honest, I probably was a visitor of this site at some point because I that is sites like that and communities like that were critical for me getting into manga and finding different creators and like dipping my toes into that because there just wasn't any means to actually go out and buy this stuff in the store. And it's still kind of flabbergasting to me, and maybe that's what I was excited about getting you on the show, is that it's still flabbergasting to me that digital is still seen as a secondary like thing for a lot of these publishers. And it's like, guys, there's so many hungry fans out there that want to consume this content, that want to like support it. But what is the block with publishers and providing digital versions of these titles? I still don't quite get it.
You know, it, this really, there's no one size fits all answer to this question, right? Like, and the motivations and the strategies for different companies are different. And sometimes it's a strategic decision. And sometimes it's, well, we just
Licensing, I'm
don't
sure.
know what we don't know, kind of
Okay.
this. And sometimes it's a licensing decision, and right. And so, kind of navigating this space it's not as straightforward as you would like it. Uh, I think I can kind of bucket it into three groups if we presume time frame for answering that question is now versus in the past, right? Um, I think on the Western publisher side, I think there was for better or worse, there was a lot of kind of this conversation around, well, will having things available digitally cannibalize our print sales? And that was proven time and time and time and time and time again that it wouldn't. And so the combination between that and COVID happening and having a lot of businesses tying all of their primary revenue in one distribution channel, that didn't actually really fully work during COVID. Um, that was a learning experience for my business, I think. But I think also kind of at the same time, if you look more globally, it's this understanding between um, how do things work domestically and what can you get away with and what kind of price sensitivity exists and what are the motivations of the people that are consuming stuff and what are the behavioral patterns that doesn't replicate globally at all, right? Like sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And having this understanding that you need to treat a global audience differently
Hmm.
than where you have your primary core business and where where you have your physical print sales is tantamount for being able to make sane business decisions. And I think that that's kind of this realization that a lot of the industry is coming to now, is that when we start thinking about the world as a global audience, as opposed to, you know, how many comic book stores can we reach and what is the reach of those comic book stores in aggregate, you need to make different decisions. And you kind of you can't think of digital as a channel per se, right? Like, and that's the core shift that we've seen over the last 2 3 years in our conversations with many of these partners, is that they're starting to think about digital as the top of, okay, well, how do we introduce the majority of people into these stories, these IPs, these franchises, these series, so that they can come into our world and our universe and become fans and become collectors and become this, that, and the other. And like at the end of the day, I think that just that shift. And how do you think about it? Is it like a channel, or is it like a part of the funnel in the first place? Is the biggest and most important distinction that we can make of what's taking place over the last 4 years.
Yeah. Would you say that your, I guess, involvement with manga helpers in that community was maybe the seed to start Global Comics, like the roadblocks and your interactions with the community and the publishers is maybe what inspired Global Comics, or did that come about in a different way?
Well, for sure, right? But the biggest difference that I'd say between Global Comics and Manga Helpers was a platform entirely constructed around the idea of bringing foreign content and from other languages into English and helping global distribution. Global Comics was kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, well, hang on, we don't need to focus on just one sourcing area. Like, comics is something that everyone in the entire world grows up, or like and this holds true for no matter where you are. You think back to your childhood, or if you're a parent and you have kids, what kind of books are you reading to people? And
Hmm.
it's picture books, and you're
Yeah.
looking at things that are drawn with some amount of text on it, right? Like, starting with very little text to way more text as the kids get older.
And I think when you consider what can be classified as a comic book, right? Like sequential storytelling, pictures and words to working together to tell a story. I think your point is, I think it exemplifies your point a little more because it's not just a Marvel or DC or superhero book that classifies as a comic, but we hear all the time, at least stateside, Captain Underpants and Dogman being the biggest selling, comic books. Those books and those sales rival anything that Marvel and DC are doing. So it's like, you've got graphic novels that count as comic books and all these other kind of mediums and way to tell sequential storytelling that count as comics.
That's exactly right. And the barrier is so low to entry because you're
Yeah.
looking at something that's drawn. And even if you don't understand the speech bubble, you can kind of understand what's going on,
Hmm.
right? And that in and for itself is makes this a medium that is so fantastic for creating inspiration in audiences.
Well said. So, all right. So what is the origin story of Global Comics? What was the series of events that finally led you and your team, or I guess you at that point, to launch Global Comics and try to solve the issue of distributing comic books to a global audience?
You know, I had too much time on my hands. And
I think I was gonna go ahead and build a global digital comic app. I got time. It's Tuesday.
it's kind of like that,
Yeah.
which sounds really, really weird if I just put it like that in the nose. But no, really. I was working at a company called Shapeways in New York City. It was a startup that.
Really quick, around what time frame we talking?
So
Early two
this was
thousands or what?
well, I worked there from 2012 to 2017, and around. 2014, I was like, okay, well, I'm already committing a lot of my time to this company, and I'm like, cool, and I'm learning a lot of stuff, right? Because I kind of ventured into that company as a product manager, and so I was learning about how do you build products for different audiences, and I'd had this meeting with folks in Japan in 2009, but we decided back then to like put all of our ideas on ice because social media hadn't grown, gig economy
Hmm.
hadn't been proven,
You were too
crowdsourcing
early.
proven, right? Like all these things that were false back then suddenly became true. And you know, I'm not the kind of person that tends to go out and spend a lot of time outdoors all the time. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm coming back from work and I'm spending my time watching stuff or reading things, but I want to do something productive and something fun, something that, like, okay, what can I do and learn at the same time? And the VP engineering at that company at Chip is a guy called Josh Levine. Today, he's the CTO of chess.com. And he was so good at kind of just looking at who I was and how I looked at engineering and software architecture and these types of things. And he would mentor me. And so I taught myself engineering through the proxy of him giving me challenges, right? And then I spent, like a couple of years just learning how to write code and experimenting and building like the progeny of GlobalComix as something just as a project of learning coding for itself. And I'd say, like I did that for maybe 5 years or so. Um, and that spanned into another company that I was at. It was a company called ESC Games, where we were trying to make these really awesome multiplayer games that 40,000 people could play together while at a stadium, just looking at Jumbotron with no app download kind of thing. Turns out having stadium games when COVID hit was, you know, not the best
Put the
business to
kibosh on
do.
that, huh? Yeah.
So as we were shutting this down, I that was I remember there was a day where I walked into my boss, who's the CEO of ESC, is a guy named Robert Hoffer, and I'm like, all right. I feel like I can finally tell you about this thing that I've been hacking on in my side project. And so I told him about GlobalComix as a concept, and I told him about, like I don't think comics have been transitioned properly from analog to digital yet. I believe that there's still a lot of opportunity, especially in the localization space of bringing content and making it available to people worldwide. And I think that conversation took about 15 minutes, and he said, "All right, let me go home, take a look at this." I got a text message the next day, and he said, "Okay, I'm in. I'll write the first check."
Wow.
And
Talk
that
about a
was the
good
moment,
boss.
right? Yeah, it's my former boss. And so he became the first check writer to our company, and I was able to bring Eric, this is another guy that I was working together with at ESC, on board as the first employee. I didn't take any salary myself at that time. Took no income actually, and it just kind of grew from there, right? Like, and over the course of from 2020 to 2024, where we are now, eventually Robert joined as a founder of the company, and Eric is now a founder of the company, and we've we've raised, significant now amounts of money. First, initially 1.5 from angels, and then 6.5 last year from institutional, from Point 72 Ventures and William Morris Endeavor and folks like that.
Wow. So there's a lot of belief in this and a lot of money to, I mean, they put their money where their mouth is, not just like saying, I believe in this, but they're putting money behind it as well. And I would imagine you must have been a pretty big, fan of comics at the time to like want to not only invest your time but also money, not take a salary and things like that. What were, I guess, when you think about that early year of working on Global Comics, just out of curiosity, and what were you reading? Like, what were some of your favorite comics at that point?
I had no time to read anything.
Wow.
Look, like I said, I wrote all of it, right? And this idea of how do you build a business
Hmm.
and being an entrepreneur, it is all consuming. And especially in the early days, before you have funding, before you can hire people to do stuff. And so you're putting on every possible hat that you can put on. Um, Now, it's not that's not to say that I wasn't reading stuff, but fractionally as part of my, let's call it, weekly time consumption spend, it'd be less than 1%, right? Like,
Okay, that's fair.
I was reading One Piece, and I was reading, like these other series that have been running for a long period of time. Um, Dr. Stone, I think, was coming out around that time, and I was like, oh, holy shit, like this is really, really intelligent. I love that.
I'm hearing you mention, name drop these manga titles, and that's one feature I do like about Global Comics is that there are manga offerings on there. There's manga available on there to read and rent and also buy. At the same time, right next to American comics like Dark Horse, Image, and all of that. So was that always the plan to like look at comics like holistically, regardless of whether it be manga or French comics or American comics? Was it always like, hey, comic books as a whole, looking at the larger umbrella, or did that come later?
No, very much was built in from the start. That was the shift between what we tried to do with manga helpers and making it, no, 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 it's all comics. It doesn't have to just be like
Got it.
manga,
Got it.
but also, it's in the name.
It's true. True. Very. That. Yeah. Good point. You chose a good name. It gets the point across.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess continuing on this train, what would you say makes Global Comics different from other digital comic platforms and apps? Like, how does it stand out from other established platforms? Like, let's say, like Hoopla, which is free for anyone that has a library card, or say, like Comixology, which is, I think, safe to say, whether you like it or not. I think it's safe to say one of the industry's longest running digital comic platforms. Like, how does Global Comics separate itself from those?
Well, I think that's actually a very clear thing and very easy thing to describe. These are platforms that are, their core premise is solely around, we have a book and you can read the book. Global Comics is about way more than that, and it's about actually community, and it's about building a global community of folks that are really interested in stuff that can connect with each other around things that they're interested around fandom, around passion, around collectability. Um, and it kind of, that is, if that is the core underpinning, then like the second layer is also, what is the motivation that we have in terms of how do we think about building our business? What is our business model? Right? Like Comixology is an interesting platform that primarily is built around paper book.
Mhm.
There's some, unlimited type thing. I'm not too familiar with Hoopla, so I can't really speak to it, but I would presume, because it's a library system, that it's based on, ISBNs and SKUs and like
Mhm.
renting and take out and such. And the thing that separates us from both of those is our focus and embrace on allowing the long tail of indie creators or solo creators or webcomic creators or manga creators or doujinshi creators to have a place to publish and self-publish, and they can be up and live within minutes with their own content. And then just kind of baking that into the chromium of how do you discover stories that are similar to each other, so you can have someone that's really interested in stories that, from major publishers, and something that comes out of these indie creators that aligns very well with passions, and we're able to make recommendations and say, oh, well, you like this kind of story, maybe you might want to try out this other thing from this undiscovered person. And so we're really trying to build this ecosystem that enables creators and publishers, no matter where they are, where they're from, to be successful and to find an audience.
Yeah, I was poking around on the website and I was going through some of the creator tools that you guys have. Now, granted, I'm not a comic creator myself. I know a lot of indie comic creators, self publishers themselves, and it looks promising, man. I mean, you guys have a whole page dedicated to resources and tools for indie comic creators, how to monetize. tips on marketing. I think you guys mentioned something about obviously they make a larger piece, a larger cut anytime one of their comic books is sold, and things like that. I guess, do you mind talking a little more about some of the tools and features that you guys have available for aspiring comic creators or people that want to post and host their comics on GlobalComix?
Sure. So all of it kind of starts with this idea that, well, right now, I guess, it starts with this idea that you have a book that you want to put online somehow. And so you go to Global Comics, you hit the publish button, and you can be live with your book or your series of multiple books within a couple of minutes. And in that process, you get to categorize and tag with metadata on what genre and what themes and what audience and this type of thing. You also get to choose, is this something that requires a paywall or does not require a paywall? Do I, in addition to the read online paywall, do I want to sell a downloadable PDF version or not? Right? Um, and so we're giving a lot of optionality for creators to just kind of come online and figure out, how do you want to start monetizing? How do you not want to start monetizing but building an audience? And in that umbrella is the automatic downstream is that all of these folks get access to a lot of analytics about how people are accessing, where they're finding it, and so on and so forth. How they're consuming each individual book, how much time is being spent on each page and each panel, etc. And then kind of so if we look at that as the first layer of the onion, beyond that is kind of, okay, well, there's education. How do you think about your comic publishing for yourself as an identity? Are you doing this because you're looking to make money? Are you trying to make a business? Are you right? And so then there's these educational pieces around, okay, well, building a business means you need to think about building a business in these ways. Now, this isn't an MBA course by any means, but it's like simplified into comic terms that is accessible to creators, right? And kind of beyond that, like the tooling that we think about is you can kind of put it in three different buckets. One is we provide real-time analytics with a pardon my French, shitload of metrics that you can kind of slice and dice in whatever way that you want to, that will help you understand how do people consume your stories and why do they like it and where do they drop off. The second piece is around, okay, well, as a comic creator that might be trying to build a business or might be trying to build an audience around,
Yeah.
there's a suite of features that we have that help them do that, right? Like an example of that might be, so you're running a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo or something like that, and you need digital fulfillment. Well, we let creators create digital fulfillment packages through our platform so that will just plug directly into these crowdsourcing or crowdfunding platform. A different example might be that maybe you're doing a book that's a collaboration between you and another creator in the comic space. Well, you can do revenue splitting in between, like, you and this other person, so that
Oh,
the
wow.
platform will handle it
Hmm.
equally. And there's just so many more things like that we've just really just looked at, well, what are the needs that these people have and how do we solve it? And the third bucket there, I think, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more esoteric, but the third bucket there is around, how do you do your audience building, right? Like, how do you tell a story, not through your comic book, but through, how do you engage with people? Where do you post? What's your like social media strategy? That is all like secondary layer around this idea of, how do you get people into the funnel to get interested in a comic, to get interested in a series that becomes collectors or fans that pay money for it. That's right now. That there's more coming in the future. you know, so
Yeah. So,
our goal,
okay.
I think, just to wrap all of that up, is we're not just creating a platform. We're trying to make an ecosystem, and we want all of the constituents of our ecosystem to be successful.
Yeah, that sounds I mean, and it makes sense, right? Like if people are hosting, if creators are hosting their comics on the platform, and just being obvious. I mean, it's on the website, and you guys are making a small cut of that. It behooves you to empower them with these tools to help them grow their audience and bring more eyes to the app. So it's one hand washing the other, which I totally respect. You said something though that piqued my interest. You mentioned being able to collect insights and analytics, which I never thought about that as I keep like a running mental tab of like the pros and cons of digital versus print because it's just a topic and kind of tired debate that a lot of us in comics have. But I've never thought about that as a significant, I guess, point for digital comics, especially like for the creator side. That's information that you can't really get from print. I mean, yeah, you could always look at how much did my comic book sold, am I sold out? That's at the end of the day, what you kind of want, right? You want your comic books to sell. But you mentioned being able to provide insights and analytics into how far did someone read? Did they stay on a page particularly long? And I'm sure like a whole other bunch of metrics and I want to know based, and we're talking, high level, based on like I guess some of the key analytics and things that you guys have measured, and considering that there might be an aspiring or indie comic creator listening right now, what would you? I'm sorry, based on that, is there any like common mistakes or are you seeing any trends among readers that would be like helpful for an indie comic creator or a small press person to know when it comes to like digital comics and how they're consumed?
I mean, yes, when I answer this, it becomes incredibly obvious to
Hmm,
anyone that really thinks about it, right?
hit
Like,
it
don't overload with information density in a small amount of space, like visually.
because it
I'll
what
use
it
this
leads to people
example.
dropping off the book or
Well, yeah, I'll use this
okay.
example. There's a publisher that we're working with that they had this book that came out, and on page 18, there's a lot of like really high jump in time spent, really high jump in people that just didn't read the next page. And
Wow.
so we're like,
And you
okay,
guys are able to measure that and see that because I mean it's
yeah,
digital. Wow, that's
well,
impressive.
not just us, but we give that
Sure,
visual
sure.
to folks. And so we looked at it together, and then we looked at the page, and I think like this page was if you imagine kind of like this, right? It was
Hmm.
like 7 panels like this just stacked on top, and there was a lot of dialogue back and forth, that back and forth, back and forth between two different characters. But the panels actually like the art didn't change. It was just the text that changed.
Interesting.
And so the theory became like we looked at this and we're like, okay, well that looks really hard to consume. The theory became, okay, well, what if we simplify, or what if we break up this page into two or three more, and we like change a little bit of panels so the pacing and the digestiveness of the page becomes simpler. And so they went from, I think, like an 80% abandon rate on that page to something like 40% just by like
Damn.
smoothing it out, right?
That's
And
impressive.
this is the type of thing that you're just not going to get in a non-digital world.
Yeah, no, for sure. I work in marketing for my day job, and metrics like that to us is like pure gold. I know I sound like slimy corporate guy, but from a with my marketing hat on and my digital hat on, that is like that's gold because trying to get feedback, customer feedback via surveys or relying on them to tell you why they stopped buying or something, it can be like pulling teeth, right? It can be difficult for people to find time to put their feelings and opinions out there, but you're collecting I mean that's like you're collecting just it's like automatic metrics and data for you in real time. And that sounds the example you gave is really cool they were able to the creators were able to make a informative creative decision where it's using digital metrics to make a informed creative decision to better enhance the reading experience that they might have not gotten the feedback any other way.
That's right. That's exactly right. Right. And like, look, to my knowledge, I might be wrong, but to my knowledge, I don't think that there's any other platform out there that gives the amount of data
No, I
that
don't
we
think so.
do and the amount of granularity and like slicing and dicing and
Hmm.
filters that we do. Now, that is both good and bad, right? Like there's also a large audience out there that has not been trained to think about publishing in this way. And so there's a chicken and egg on like how do you help people
Sure.
become successful with the power of the data that we're giving them.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
like
So it's safe to say, I mean, you said it earlier, it's in the name Global Comics. It's safe to say that you guys are hosting comic books from all over the world. Is there any like interesting places or maybe hubs that are really passionate about uploading comics, or I don't know, maybe any interesting publisher that you've come across on a global scale?
I mean, yes, every day.
For example, are you seeing a lot of publishers, indie publishers coming out of, just toss a name out, like Brazil or something? Anything that has piqued your interest that you're like, oh wow, okay, they got a thriving comic community
Really
there.
interesting stuff coming out of both creators and kind of publisher side
Mhm.
from Africa, actually.
Wow, okay.
And the reason why I flag that specifically is because when you speak about comics in general, it might not be the first place your mind might go from sequential art storytelling. Like, oh,
Hmm.
but no, like that. There's a lot of like really capable creators coming from these places of the world that you might not even think about.
Yeah, wow.
That to me, like the fact that we're able to give a platform to folks that and especially in this world where because of how we're constructed, that if their stuff is performing well with an audience, their book can be right side by side with some of the bigger publishers worldwide, right? Like
Yeah,
that.
and I've noticed that too. Kind of scroll. I've got the homepage pulled up, and one definitely a kudos that I'll give you and the rest of the team is the segmentation of the website. There's a lot of different segments and carousels that do a good job of like categorizing certain books. Like I'm scrolling right now, you've got like a Hero Week segment, and it's got Transformers, Hellboy, Berserker, Invincible, and then you've got a segment for comic books that are like leaving soon, most popular on Global Comics, and it is a good mix of obvious ones and identifiable ones that I'm familiar with, in addition with like some smaller publishers, like some manga sprinkled in there. So yeah, I just want to give you kudos on that. It
Thank you.
reminds me of why I like the Shonen Jump app too. The Shonen Jump app does a really good job of being like, okay, maybe you want to read something horror, something horror manga or superhero manga or romance. They do a really good job of kind of taking the Netflix model of just approaching it from genre and category versus just publisher and whatnot.
Yep. Like the way that this experience kind of boils down is we look at like we think about discovery as three different ventures, right? And the home experience is two of them, and each of these we call them sections.
Hmm.
As you think about like a gold picks or an update from creators and new releases and so on and so forth, um, they can either be curated by staff or by friendlies or by
Hmm.
partners or this that and the other, or they can be dynamically driven by popularity or readership or trending, or they can be personalized recommendations for people, right? Like so each of these sections can be all of those things. um and so the three buckets is really kind of like personalized for you, curated by us, and choose your own adventure. And the choose your own adventure part is in the explore section of our website and on the app, where we have so many filters that people really narrow down. Oh, I want like I want time travel, science, medical stories, but with anthropomorphic characters to take place in the 1500s in the manga art style and vertical scroll, and you can find that, right?
Damn. I'm actually curious what would pop up if I applied all those filters. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, like all of it is, and that's the beauty of it, because we don't, as much as we understand that there's a lot of power in having really good recommendation engines, and we
Hmm.
continue
Yeah.
to invest in this, there's still a segment of folks or even just moments in their day to day where they're like, I want to go find something like that. and it's going to be so far out from what any recommendation engine might be compared to what their normal habits are. And just enabling folks to discover that way, I think that there's a huge amount of power in that, and there's a huge amount of value.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about how, I mean, if you think about like comic shop culture or just being friends with other, comic book fans, word of mouth goes a long way, right? Like, yeah, I get so many, press releases and, preview comics, but there's nothing like a good word of mouth. Hearing from another friend, hey, you got to check this book out, or hey, Images dropped this, you got to check it out. So I do appreciate that you guys have so many different ways of recommending books. Matter of fact, last night, I forgot which section I found this in. I think I was just scrolling like Image. I was like, oh, what do they got for Image Comics? And I ended up borrowing. I want to say borrowing because or reading this Blood Rick comic from Image Comics, and I damn near devoured it. I mean, it's like a 150-page comic. I stayed up way too late last night reading it. It's almost like Conan meets Wolverine meets like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. It is excellent, and I was really happy that you guys had like volume 1 on here. Um, and I guess if you don't mind talking a little bit more, sticking on the reader side, because I know that you guys offer. Well, I guess you guys advertise yourself as a free digital comic platform, but you guys also have a membership. What is it called? Like the Global Comics Gold membership. I guess could you talk a little bit about the difference between the free comics on there versus like what you get as part of the membership?
Sure. So, anyone can publish their books on GlobalComix, and they can
Okay.
choose whether or not do I want a paywall in my book at all ever or
Hmm.
not, right? And a truly free series will never have a paywall anywhere,
Got it.
depending on like if it's book 1 or 70 or 150 or whatever. Um, there's some amount of free series that come out from publishers because they want to make their universe available to folks.
Sure. Yeah. They want awareness and get the
Yeah,
name out there.
and then there's content that is paywall. Now, in the paywall bucket, again, we give a lot of customizability, and we empower the creators and publishers to choose where in each book do they set a paywall, right? And that kind of, it might be that for a particular series, let's say it's a series of single issues that has, I don't know, I'm making this up, but like 70 single issues.
Hmm.
Maybe they might make the first 13 single issues free, but then the paywall kicks in somewhere on issue 14. That would be considered a paid series, even though there's like books that are free in the series. And we just like internally call it a free preview. How long is a free preview? Well, it can be a book, it can be a couple of pages, it can be, whatever. Um, and this gold membership is basically it's the single payer monthly that you pay that unlocks access to anything that is behind a paywall today,
Oh, wow. Okay. So
right?
one
And
so one price membership for the whole site.
yes,
Wow.
for anything that's here today, right? And that means that anything that right now is paywalled, that if you pay your $7.99 in the web or $9.99 in the app, depends on like where you come in. Um, Once you have a subscription, you can read all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's very impressive. That is like really impressive. Um, I guess how big was it to get DC on board as a publisher? Because I find that for a lot of comic fans, especially digital comic fans, that's usually the make or break it. Right? Like it's one thing to have. Yeah, I think it's a big deal, in my opinion, to have publishers like Image and Boom and a lot of these other direct market publishers. But for a lot of fans, the make or break it is, does it have Marvel or DC? I normally hear that first anytime I try to recommend apps like Global Comics and other things. How big was it for you guys to get DC on board?
Well, I mean, for me on a personal level, like I grew up, I was a huge Batman fan when I was 5. Not necessarily from the comics. Like this was Adam West's
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
adaptation and Human, you know, and so for me, just this idea that holy shit, we're gonna have Batman on the platform was like, like holy shit, this is so cool.
Yeah, time to
Um,
celebrate.
but to answer your question, like I think the way that the team felt about it is that it's certainly a stamp of recognition, right? Like
For
that
sure.
that we have been doing something that not just the community, but that the industry is recognizing as a beneficial force to both the industry and the ecosystem. And like I think I can speak on behalf of everyone on the team that we were incredibly humbled by this idea that these bigger players were like, okay, well, Global Comics is doing something right,
Hell
right?
yeah.
Um, and for us, that was that like internally that was one of those big moments where I got to go back to the team and say like, we signed a contract.
Hell yeah.
Um,
Balloons came out of nowhere, streamers,
yeah,
cake.
like confetti's like
Yeah.
raining down out of the sky. Um, and I think like we've seen like just when we look at consumer behavior, whenever we bring on, and this isn't true just for DC, this is true for any new publisher that we bring in, is that as we bring more stuff that people have a pre-existing idea that they're interested in reading before they come into GlobalComix,
Hmm.
um, whether or not they stay or they quit or they delete their account or they bounce or something, right? Like that ratio goes down, and in aggregate, the more stuff that we have that people are looking for when they come into the platform. And certainly DC had a larger impact on that, because there's a lot of people who come in and be like, looking for Batman, or looking for Superman, or
For
looking
sure.
for
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. And so just kind of even from the metrics side all the way through to the way that we felt and the pride that we felt and the way that the staff felt, and the way that we've seen people speak about us as a brand and as a platform, you know, big impact.
Damn right. I gotta say, man, it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of things right. I mean, from the offerings, the publisher offerings, the emphasis on empowering, creators and small press publishers and getting their comics out on here and to a global audience, excuse the pun. But also the addition of like vertical comics, which are slowly growing on me in a big way. I think it adds to the reading experience, like instead of, and it just feels more native to reading a digital comic, kind of like the vertical. We do it every day, scrolling, right? So it feels kind of like intuitive and natural. And I guess Chris, it feels like Global Comics, not to sound too mushy, but you guys popped on my radar almost at the right time. Earlier this year, I had an opportunity to have Travis from Omnibus on the pod. They had just started. They were a digital comic platform. I was really excited about Omnibus, and Travis and his team were great. And they just ran into a lot of challenges and funding and publisher dealing with publishers. Unfortunately, the company they closed Omnibus actually this year. So it was heartbreaking because I saw like the potential. I saw their heart was in it, and they had all these great things lined up. And I'll be honest, it kind of dealt a blow in terms of like how I saw digital it's like, well, damn, if Omnibus can't if Omnibus can't get off the ground, then is there any really hope for digital comics? Am I stuck with the options I currently have, which I'm not too mad about, but you're like, just so much better thing. There's so much to be desired with our current digital comic offering, and then I straight up like a month or two ago, I started seeing the ads for Global Comics, and I was like, is this a joke? Like, wait a minute, they've got comics from around the world. So I got to give you props, man. Yeah, you guys kind of came up. You guys came into my radar at the right time, and yeah, I've been enjoying using the app so far. I do want to talk about features that you got coming up, and and I want to start with a question from a mutual friend of ours. He's also an avid digital comic reader himself, and he's a fellow new user to the app himself. His name is Chris Hacker. My audience knows him. He's Chris Hacker from the Oblivion Bar podcast. But I was talking to him about the app. We're sharing ideas like, oh, this is cool. I want to see this. And he sent in a question for you. He wants to know, are there any plans to create a new this week carousel / section for the books that are brand new at your local comic shop this week? And I'm going to piggyback off that question, and I want to kind of hear from you. What other future features can we look forward to from Global Comics? Like, which ones have been the most requested? Which ones are you guys, working through? Anything that you can share, obviously.
I love that question because it is so easy to answer that one specifically. Yes. And and and
There you go, Chris.
here's even better. Uh Everything that you see on the home experience or on the channels experience, we built an entire custom CMS for it. And so I can add that section right now if I wanted to.
Oh, you've got
And
the red button on your desk.
I,
Oh, you
I,
gotta
I
just press
can
the red
I
button.
can create it and I can make it live and I can just like populate
Hmm.
it for everyone without the new app build, without like any code shift. Right. And the real question here is, what do people want? Right. Like this is such a good request. And I love the fact that you're bringing that to our attention. Right. And I think the more that people do this, maybe perhaps a lot of folks are not used to having a company be able to be nimble and respond to requests like this.
Hmm.
But for us, we'll eat this up, right? Like if you have good requests, tweet at us or message us or send us an email and say like, "Hey, I really am looking for this, that, and the other." And so, to that regard, I happen to know for a fact that some other features that are also coming very soon, that compound the benefits of having something like that, uh, makes it so that yes, 100%.
That's good stuff. That's really good to hear. And I'm thinking more about why I brought up omnibus and that story. I think I brought that up because at this point, longevity to me is one of the most important, I think, aspects I look at when it comes to like digital comic platforms. And because how many times have we seen companies and apps try to do something new and bring something new, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, it just doesn't work out. And I guess I want to hear from you, Chris. What is Global Comics doing to ensure like its longevity? Like, what do you guys have in place? Like, Chris, I can't take another heartbreak, man. I need a good digital comic reader
Well,
to stick around.
I very much am going to live into that ask. I'll tell you this, right? Like, look, we started our operations in 2020. We didn't launch our consumer app until 2023.
Okay.
We didn't take institutional funding from VCs until 2023. And the reason for that was exactly the thing that you just described. There's so many platforms that came and went, and it, like, to your point, the comics industry, the comics platform industry, the digital industry of comics has been fraught with folks that show up, raise a bunch of money, and then disappear 18 months later because they run out of cash and they can't like raise again. And the reason they can't raise again is because they don't have any of the metrics that are required after an initial fundraise to justify a second investment. So what do we do differently? Well, we didn't go to venture capitalists from the start. We trickle funded through angels for 3 years, and we spent a lot of time aggregating a lot of content and building a relationship and showing staying power from 2020 to 21 to 22 to 23. And we showed folks that we were here and that we weren't going away and that we weren't trying to initially just make a big splash in launching an app with not enough content for anyone to read, right? And so when we finally went to market in October of last year with our mobile app, that was because at that point we'd hit 55,000 titles or 50,000 titles, one of those numbers. And that was, we'd had 50,000 titles after, let's call it 3.5 years of building a content library and building relationships and showing that we had staying power. Between October last year and now, so now we're at almost 79,000 titles. So we've grown by 60% in just the year since the point where we said that we had enough titles, right? Like, And really, what indicates staying power is that we have the stories that both people already know, but also the things that they don't know but they will like. And you need both of those things, and you need a really like wide and deep ocean of comics for the long tail of folks that have wildly different interests and wildly different, like focus areas, to be able to come in and say, there's something here for me. And I think as long as we as a business, as a company, operate in this way, where we try to make sure that what we do makes sense for living into reader expectations, and we help the publishing side, whether it be creators or publishers, understand what that is and live into it also, I think we're going to be here for very long.
Chris, I like hearing that. Look, I will remain optimistic, and I will be watching and rooting for you, as well as using the app, because I've been enjoying it so far. I want to wrap up with one other question. I normally say this for, like, whenever I'm interviewing like a traditional comic creator, but I am curious how this question how you answer this question. If you could give a piece of advice for any aspiring comic creators that want to, get their stories out there, get their comic books in front of more eyeballs, what would I guess, what would be your piece of advice? And normally I ask based on, normally I would ask, based on your career and how you started. But I think you're in an interesting position because you are currently helping and empowering, creators get their books out there and improve and sell their stuff. I guess, like, what would be your main piece of advice to aspiring comic creators that want to get their stories out there and sell their books based on what you know and what you've done with Global Comics?
That's a really good question. Let me think about that for a moment. I think it boils down to three things. Um, if you're someone that has a story or has a passion, you're trying to create something and bring it into the world. And this is not dissimilar to what I've been doing with GC, right? You need to have a level of passion for doing the thing that you are trying to do, like telling that story and spreading it out into the world in a way that flame can't be distinguished, or you can't remove the flame, right? Like you can't be extinguished. And that, I think, is very important. Like you have to believe in yourself, you have to believe in the thing that you're trying to do, and you need to put blinders on for a lot of folks that often will give negative input or negative feedback, negative comments, for no other reason than that
They
they
can't
do.
do it themselves.
And I think that the second piece of it is that you need to kind of understand that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And that you are going to go through this journey, and you're going to be doing things that you're going to be better at in 5 years than you are right now. And that's okay. That's the whole point. And you can't judge what you have right now by the idea of what you might be in the future as a reason to not do what you're going to do right now. Right? Like that just becomes instant failure. And I think kind of the third and almost equally important piece of advice here is that if you're a solo creator and you're trying to create this universe and you're trying to create these stories, you're trying to tell the story, creating it doesn't mean that people will find it. You have to spend and budget off at least 20% of your time and actually promoting yourself, marketing yourself, making sure that your stuff is in front of people that are interested. And that doesn't necessarily mean spam 50 links on Twitter every day. It means, like, think about who are the people that are interested in the kind of story that you're creating. Where are those people? How do you pattern match for like finding larger groups of those people? What kind of communities are they in? And finding ways to be an authentic participant in those locations and sharing your stories and putting your stories in front of people that will appreciate it. I think if you can do those three things well, and you can have the drive and the grit to push through even when things get really hard. That's what really becomes the underpinning of success, I think.
Wow. Well said, Chris. I appreciate you sharing that. I definitely want to echo that second point about spending just as much time marketing as it is creating. I know a lot of creators despise that part. It's very difficult. I mean, it can sometimes be demoralizing, going on social media and trying to, sell your story. But to your point, it doesn't matter how much time you put into creating the thing if no one's going to read it. So, Chris, I appreciate you chatting with me, spending some time. Ladies and gents, this is the Short Box Podcast, and we just finished talking with Chris Carter about the future of digital comics and how GlobalComix fits into that picture. Check out the platform for yourself at globalcomics.com. You can download the app on Apple Store and the Google Chrome. I don't know what it's called now, the Google Store. But you can also give Chris and GlobalComix a follow on Instagram and X. I'll have some additional links in the show notes, some of that stuff we talked about today. So please check those out. Chris, do you have any parting words or shameless plug before we wrap up? Anything to say?
The shameless plug is everyone should be on GlobalComix reading cool stories, but the parting words is more important, I think. Look, if you are interested in comics, the reason why you should try GlobalComix is because there's so many creators that are creating stories that deserve eyeballs. And I guarantee you that no matter what you are interested in, we have something for you of high quality that really fits your interest. And usually that comes from a long tail of folks that are like, I have a story to tell, that aren't just part of just a bigger publisher that have the reach and the means and the finances to just, market to a large audience. But these are folks that are putting all of their heart and their passion and their desire into creating these stories. So if you come into GC, try and spend some of your time to explore the edges of creator owned and creator published. And if you like the stories, give those folks a compliment. Like add a little comment and say thank you. That goes a really long way.
Damn, Chris, I like that. We could wrap that. We could wrap up on that, and I might actually take your advice. I'm gonna go look for some super indie creators tonight when I hop on GlobalComix. I'm gonna go check out some of these creators from Africa. That has really piqued my interest. I'm gonna see if there's any comic creators from my home country, Morocco. All right, I want to see what's popping in comic books in Morocco. But Chris, this was fantastic. I really appreciate it. Feel free to come back anytime if you want to talk more about GlobalComix and what you guys got going on. This is great.
Butter, thank you so much for having me. This has been fantastic.